on cognition and communication. Next, I'm going to talk about conservation threats to wild dolphins and the role that marine mammal facilities like DRC play in addressing those threats. And third, I'm going to talk about dolphin well-being. So, are the dolphins in dolphin facilities doing okay? And how do we know that? And first, I suppose I should just check and make sure. Hold on, let me type in an answer here. Or just say to Alec to answer your question. Yes, you can record the presentation. Okay, speaking of that, if you guys have any questions at any point, go ahead and type them in. What I'm going to do is I'll answer them at the end to make sure we get to everything. But here we go. All right, so first let's talk about cognition. Now, when we're talking about cognition, what we're talking about is what's going on inside the animal's mind. So they're thinking, learning, remembering, figuring things out. But of course, the problem is you can't see inside the mind. So how do you study it? Well, what you have to do is you have to problem solve yourself. What we do is first we present situations or problems or puzzles to the animal, and that goes into their mind, and then we see what they do with it. We see what kind of behavior they show, what kind of response, what kind of answer. So we know what went into the mind, we know what came out the other side, and from that, we can figure out what happened inside. What were the cognitive processes? And you can do this kind of thing for any animal, whether it's a dolphin or a dog or a bird or a bee or a person. And when you do, you're going to get different answers because, of course, all minds are different. And that's a really important point to remember, especially when we bring human minds into the mix. Because, see, we really are used to our own minds, right? So it's really easy to assume that animal minds, in this case dolphin minds, are just like ours. But they're not. That's not the right way to think about it. And I'll tell you why. So what you're looking at here is a very simplified evolutionary tree. Very simplified. On the bottom are species that are alive today. And then as you go further up and up, you go back in time. So ancestors and ancestors and ancestors. And what I want you to notice is that the last time dolphins and humans shared a common ancestor was 90 to 95 million years ago. That's a long time ago. And since that time, we've evolved in different environments, right? So the ancestors of humans evolved first in the jungles and then in the savannas, while the ancestors of dolphins went back to the sea. And these two different evolutionary pathways have led to profound differences between us. Some of them obvious, and some of them maybe not so obvious. So let's talk about some of those. First, we have really different body plans, right? So where humans have all these gangly moving pieces like this, dolphins are torpedo-shaped, which means we're interacting with the world differently. So we have hands to pick things up. They don't. We also perceive the world differently, right? Our eyes are on the front of our head, where their eyes are on the sides of their head. We literally see the world differently. We also have other different senses. Oh, someone is saying they can't hear me. Can I get a sound check? Can other people hear me? Can you hear me if I'm talking? Someone type yes. Someone saying yes, yes, yes. Okay, so whoever typed they can't, that's, okay, I got it. That's on your side that I hope you can figure it out. Okay, yay. All right, so different perceptual capabilities. So dolphins have echolocation, so they can see with sound. We don't have that, but we have smell, and they don't. The point being that we're interfacing with the world differently. We've also evolved different neuroanatomies, different brains. So, for example, the cerebral cortex, which is that outer layer where thinking and learning and cognition happens, in dolphins, it's actually bigger area-wise with more folds. However, it's also thinner with different types of cells and different arrangements. In other words, they have different wiring than we do. And the areas of the brain are arranged differently. So, for example, our visual area is in the back, and our auditory area is on the side, and we've got brain space in between, what we call association cortex, so those two areas can talk to each other. In dolphins, their visual and auditory area is right up next to each other, so they don't need to have association cortex between those areas to talk to each other. The point being that our brains are arranged differently, which means our minds work differently, right? Both in terms of how information gets in and what information gets in, and then what happens to that information, how it gets processed once it's inside. So what we're trying to figure out is how do dolphin minds work? What are their minds like? Okay. And so I want to talk about 3 different studies today. The first, we're going to talk about physical reasoning. Next, we're going to talk a bit about communication, and then we're going to talk about cooperation. So first, physical reasoning. The question here is, what do dolphins understand about out-of-sight objects? In other words, when an object goes out of sight, can they still track it and reason about it? Now, humans do this all the time. For example, visual aids, right? Here's a ball. If I put a ball in a cup, do you guys know where the ball is? You should, right? It's in the cup. This is a no-brainer. What about if I move the cup? Now, you didn't actually see the ball move, but I bet you know that that ball is still in the cup because you reasoned, well, the ball was in the cup moved, therefore the ball had to move. And the question is, can dolphins do that kind of inference? So here's how we tested it. First, we created a game, and the game was find the stuffed alligator. Now, why did we use the stuffed alligator? We could have used anything we wanted, but the very first dolphin that we tested, his favorite toy was that stuffed alligator, so that's what we used. And the way the game works is no matter where on the dock we put that alligator, he was supposed to touch it, or any of the dolphins. We did this with a number of dolphins. And if we put it on a bucket, then he was supposed to touch the bucket that the alligator was on top of. Now, in training, the alligator never disappeared completely into the bucket. You could always see it in training. But then in testing, we finally put the alligator inside one of the buckets. And the question is, once he can no longer see that alligator, does he know where it is? And I want to show you what that looks like. So here's, if it comes up, what a trial looks like. All right, so first she shows him the alligator. She puts the alligator into the bucket. You can see him watching. She puts lids on and then goes to alert the other experimenter. Let me stop and explain why we do that. It's very important that the person who is asking the question, where is the alligator, doesn't actually know the answer. That way they can't possibly be giving any sort of accidental cues or hints or anything like that. So one person always hides, or we put lids on so that when the second person comes up, they don't know the answer and they're the one that asks. Okay, so she does. She asked, where is it? The dolphin picks a bucket. And yet, they were great at that. They were fantastic at that. Once the alligator disappeared, they knew exactly where it was. But what if we make it harder? What about if we ask them to infer object movement, just like we did with the ball and the cup? So it looks like this. Starts off exactly the same. She shows him the alligator. She puts the alligator in a bucket, but now she's going to move the bucket. And the dolphin is watching. The dolphin absolutely sees that the bucket moved. Put the lids on, but does he know where the alligator is? Does he know the alligator moved with the bucket? So where is it? And he picks a bucket, and he picks the wrong bucket. To our surprise and shock, the dolphins were really bad at this game. Once, if a bucket moved with an object inside it, they didn't know where that object was. Oops, hang on. So, just to recap, with dolphins' physical reasoning, they absolutely could remember where an object went if they saw it go there. But what they couldn't do is infer object movement. And what I need you guys to realize is this is really different from how humans think, right? This is a no-brainer to you guys. We get this ability, we as humans, about 18 months old, about a year and a half, kids solve this problem. And after that, we don't even think about it. This is obvious to us, but it was a really, really hard problem for them. Okay, next I want to tell you about a study we did on dolphin communication. But first I need to give you sort of a crash course in dolphin communication, what it's like. So dolphins make 3 basic types of sounds. The first are echolocation clicks. I told you echolocation is how they can sort of see the sound. It sounds kind of like a creaking door. It's perceptual. The second is burst pulse sounds. So these are things like squawks and growls and blats, the kind of emotion-laden sounds. And then they also make these narrowband whistles. And they do something really interesting with whistles. And so that's what we're going to talk a bit more about today. Now, when we're studying whistles, when we want to see what they look like, we use something that's called a spectrogram, like you see here. You can think of it sort of like a graph of sound. So on the y-axis is the frequency, so how high or how low a sound is. And then on the x-axis is sound. Is time. So the way that this sound is going to go is it's going to go high and then low and then high and then low. I'll play it for you in a minute. Now what you're looking at here is a dolphin whistle, but it's not the only kind of dolphin whistle. If you put a hydrophone, an underwater microphone, into a group of dolphins, you're going to hear lots of different kinds of whistles. However, It's not the case that all of the dolphins are making all of those whistles like it would be if it were words in a language. That's not what they're doing. Instead, each dolphin has their own individual whistle that they make over and over and over. So for example, that first whistle might be from our dolphin Marina. Another whistle might be from Flagler. Another one might be from Luna. Another one might be from Tanner. Each dolphin has their own whistle. And what scientists believe is that these individual whistles, which we call signature whistles, are vocal labels, kind of like names, in that they refer to a specific individual and they allow them to keep in contact with each other. They're not exactly like names, but they're close, and I'll explain more in a minute. So if signature whistles are acting to allow dolphins to keep in contact with other specific dolphins, one of the most important examples of that has to be to allow moms and calves to keep in contact with each other, to swim away from each other, and to find each other again. But how does that work? Well, we know from studies in the wild that when moms and calves are temporarily caught and separated, which might happen, for example, they do health assessments of wild populations, and so they might temporarily catch a mom and her calf. And when they do that, each dolphin will make its own signature whistle over and over and over. They will occasionally make the others whistle as well, but mainly they're making their own. When you have calves who are about a year old and they're off swimming off on their own, what are they doing? They're also repeatedly making their own whistle, especially when they're coming back towards mom. But what about when mom's the one who wants to reunite with the calf? Well, we didn't know. To answer this question, we have to set up a situation where mom wants the calf to come back. There's no way to do that study in the wild. However, in a marine mammal facility like ours, we can just ask. So that's what we did. This study we did with one of our moms, Marina, and her calf Windley, who was 3 to 5 months old at the time. And what we did is we asked Marina to do one of two very similar things. So first was, hey, go get your calf. And the way that this worked is she would be doing a training session with a trainer, and her calf Windley was off swimming around in the lagoon, and the trainer would look out for instances where Windley was off somewhere, and she would ask Marina, go get your baby. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like, but just to preview it, I want you to notice that at the bottom of the slide, you see a spectrogram. Remember, that's sort of a graph of sound. So you can see the sounds that Marina makes when she's asked to go get her baby. It looks like this. Let's see, Marina. So there's a whistle, another whistle. She's off going to find Windley, and hopefully comes back with her. Yay! Great job, Marina. So just to show you, what she did is she whistled twice, right? And the question, though, is what did she whistle? And what she whistled was her own whistle. All right, now, importantly, if we asked Marina to, instead of getting her baby, to go get an object, she didn't whistle at all. And that was an important scientific control because we wanted to be sure that it wasn't just she made her whistle when the trainer was asking her to do things or when she was going to retrieve objects. No, it was specific to retrieving her calf. So this is what we knew before we did the study. And now we know that when mom wants to reunite with her calf, she makes her own signature whistle. Again, notice how different this is from what humans do. It's really different from human names in this way. I guarantee you, when you were a kid, or if you are a kid, and your parent wants you to come to them, they do not stand there and call their own name over and over. That would be crazy. That's not the way we do. But it is the way that dolphins do it. Okay. Next, cooperation. So if you look in the wild, you will see instances where animals seem to be cooperating, right? So you might see, and you've probably seen a group of birds chasing away a predator, or you might see animals digging a hole together, or you might see animals hunting together. And we know that dolphins are one of the animals that does this. So in the picture on the right, you see something that's called strand fishing. And strand fishing is when in some populations of dolphins, a few dolphins will rush towards the shore. And as they do, the fish that are in the water in front of them get pushed in a wave up onto the shore. And then they're stranded there, and so the dolphins can just grab them and slide back in the water. Okay, but when you see animals doing things like this in the wild, it's hard to know if they are actively and intentionally cooperating or if they're just doing the same thing at the same time. So for example, if you have two dogs, right, and a rabbit runs by, most likely both of those dogs are going to chase after that rabbit. They're going to take off because they're each individually deciding, I'm going to go get that rabbit. That's really different, though, than actively cooperating. Hey, let's get that rabbit together. You go this way, I'll go this way. So the question we wanted to answer is, do dolphins actively cooperate? In other words, can they understand a situation where they have to work together to solve the task? Okay, so here's what we did. We set up a task, a machine, where they had to work together. There were two underwater buttons that I've circled there in yellow. And the game was they had to press those buttons simultaneously to win, and specifically within 1 second of each other. So if both of them press at the same time, they win. If just one presses, or if one presses and the other one lags more than a second, then they would not win. And importantly, they needed to press them together even if they were sent from different times. So they're sent from across the lagoon, and sometimes we send them up to 20 seconds apart. And this part is actually the key to understanding cooperation, or to show that they understand cooperation. Because if we send them at the same time and they swim together and they press together, that could just be coincidence. However, if one of them is sent first and one of them is asked to wait, then in order to cooperate, that one that's sent first has to wait until the other one is asked to go, and then they can coordinate and go together. Okay. We had an overhead camera so we could see what was happening right at the buttons. And what I want you to notice, because I'm going to show you a video in a minute, we had one of the dolphins, you will see a dot on their melon and also on their dorsal fin. This is just zinc oxide that we put on them. That's the ingredient in sunscreen. And the only point of that was so that it was really easy to tell at a glance who was who from the overhead camera. Okay, here is what a trial looks like. Yes. So, the dolphin is asked to go. The thing will stop and wait. And the other one, and then they coordinate together and press their button. They're going to come back. I'm going to show you that trial again, but this time from the overhead camera. So this is that same trial from the overhead camera. One dolphin is sent. You see them come in the screen. Then the other dolphin is sent. That first dolphin definitely waited. They coordinate and they press together. All right. So yes, let's close that. So do dolphins actively cooperate? Absolutely. Not only did they understand that they had to cooperate, but they were able to coordinate super precisely. By the end of the study, there was just a third of a second difference between those dolphins pressing the buttons. They were pressing at basically the same time and being very precise about it. Okay, so we've talked about 3 different studies of cognition and cognition and communication with very different results. Right? In the first study on physical reasoning, whether they could reason about an object once it went out of sight, the dolphins were really not good at that. Surprising to us, but not good at all. In communication, the dolphins did vocally communicate in order to call their baby, but they do it in a very different way than we do, right? So they would use their own name, their own signature whistle, rather than calling the baby's name. And then in cooperation, they were rock stars. They were fantastic. And the thing I want you to notice about this, when we're talking about dolphin cognition, I want you to remember that a dolphin's mind is not like ours. They have their own mind, which, as we showed, have evolved separately from ours for a long, long, long time. And so we're never trying to figure out how are dolphins like humans. Instead, the game is to figure out how does a dolphin's mind work. Okay, but this isn't a study this isn't a talk that's just about the dolphin mind. So next I want to talk about conservation and what does any of this have to do with conservation. So let's step back first and talk about threats. to wild dolphins? What sort of conservation challenges and threats do they face? Well, in some parts of the world, unfortunately, dolphins are still hunted and killed. Um, less obvious to people, but it is a threat, is harassing dolphins. And by harassing, I mean when you get close enough to a wild dolphin that you impact their behavior. Now, in the United States, this is illegal. But even if it weren't illegal, it's very dangerous for the dolphins. It's not good for them because you're disturbing their behavior. So you're getting in the way of their natural behavior of hunting, of mating, of parenting, right? And sometimes people will even want to feed dolphins. And I know that I'm sure they think they're doing a good thing. They think they're helping the dolphins out, but they're not. It's really dangerous for the dolphins because if dolphins think that boats are where food comes from, then they're going to approach boats. And when dolphins approach boats, they get hit by the propellers, and that can really seriously injure and kill them. So please, please, please don't feed wild dolphins. Okay, there are also environmental disasters like oil spills. So a few years back, we had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. From that, there was what we call an unusual mortality event for bottlenose dolphins in that area, which means a lot of dolphins died because of that. There's also marine debris. This is trash that makes its way into the ocean where animals can get entangled in it, or they can ingest things that aren't food, which can, of course, harm them. And then there's noise pollution. So loud noise from ships, from oil and gas exploration, from military sonar. Dolphins are really acoustic animals. Hearing is really important to them. So loud noises, again, interferes with their natural behaviors of breeding, parenting, foraging, etc. And it can damage their ears directly. Now, the common thread to all of this is, of course, people, right? People are the biggest threat to wild dolphins, whether directly through killing or harassing them, or indirectly through the many human practices we have that impacts the environment that they live in. And because people are the problem, it's really important that people find ways to be the solution as well. So what I want to talk about next is the two roles that marine mammal facilities play in addressing these conservation issues. Specifically, we provide research and expertise with animals that you can't get in the wild, and provide a forum for connecting the public to these issues. Let me talk about those separately. So first, like I said, marine mammal facilities provide an opportunity for research and expertise that's just impossible to achieve in the wild. Before we had dolphins in marine mammal facilities, we didn't even know the basics about them. How do dolphins work, right? For example, echolocation. I've mentioned that a couple of times. This is their ability to see the sound. That was discovered in a marine mammal facility because you have to have the animals up close where you can ask them to navigate the sound, to navigate in the dark, to navigate when they're blindfolded, or to find something when they're blindfolded or in the dark. You need to have them up close and personal for that. Signature whistles. We've talked a bunch about those. Those were also discovered in marine mammal facilities where we knew they made sounds, right? But we didn't know that each individual dolphin has its own individual signature whistle. That was discovered in a facility. Pregnancy and birth. We didn't used to know how long is a dolphin's pregnancy. How is a baby dolphin born? That's really, really hard to know in the wild. In a marine mammal facility, you can just watch it happen. This is a picture of one of our dolphins giving birth. You can see the baby's tail flukes there. Not only that, we could watch the mom as she went through her pregnancy. We can see how much weight she gains. We could even ultrasound her so we could watch the baby growing. Hearing range. Once we have them up close and personal, you can give them hearing tests. So now we know what sorts of sounds and in what ranges can affect them. Lung physiology. This is a study that's being done out in Dolphin Quest, Oahu. And basically what they have, that device that you see is called a pneumotachometer or a flow meter. And what it does is what they have, that device that you see is called a pneumotachometer or a flow meter. And what it does is it measures the gases that are in the dolphin's blow from when they exhale. So they ask the dolphin to breathe into this machine, and it can measure, their lung capacity. It can measure what different gases are in there when they're resting, after they've dived, things like that. And cognition. We've talked a lot about cognition, so I'm not going to go into that too much. But what I want you to realize is in order to do these kinds of cognitive studies, you have to have the dolphins up close and personal. You have to be able to present them with puzzles and situations with all of the scientific rigor and repetition and control that you really can't get in the wild. And by the way, what I'm showing you there is a picture from a cognitive study that we didn't talk about today, but I'll tell you real quick, this was a study to ask whether or not dolphins can understand the concept of less. So what their job was, what they were supposed to do is pick the board that has a fewer number of dots, if they could, and they could. All right. Research in marine mammal facilities also has allowed us to develop ways of assessing and improving the health of the animals. So for example, we've developed and adapted equipment and techniques for assessment. So a few minutes ago, I talked about ultrasounding during pregnancy. This is a picture of what that looks like. We ask the mom to lay out next to the doc, and she lays very still, and then they're able to put an ultrasound wand over her abdomen and look at the baby. We've also now grown to understand physiological and behavioral baselines and deviations from those baselines. So for example, what are a dolphin's nutritional requirements? What is their blood chemistry like when they're sick or when they're healthy? How can you tell if a dolphin is sick, and how can you treat them? And once we have that information, we can use that information to also assess and treat stranded animals. Okay, so research in marine mammal facilities has given us a lot of information that is really hard or impossible to get in the wild. In fact, the vast majority of what we know about dolphin physiology, healthcare, perception, and cognition, they've all been found in marine mammal facilities. And having that information allows scientists to interpret wild behavior, or helps them interpret wild behavior, and informs conservation practices. Just like research in any field, you have to understand how a system works before you can design solutions for that system. Now, I want to be clear though, I am not in any way saying that research in marine mammal facilities is better than research in the wild, or that one of them can replace the other. The fact of the matter is we need both. There are some studies, there are some questions that can only be answered with wild populations, and then there are other questions that can only be answered if you have the animals up close and personal. And these two different types of studies work together so that we can better understand the animals in general. And by the way, this isn't just specific to studies with dolphins. This is just how science works in general. Okay, so the second role that marine mammal facilities play, and just as important in my opinion, is they provide a forum where the public can directly experience marine mammals, can learn about the challenges that they face in the wild, and can create the emotional connections necessary to inspire conservation. And that last piece is really important. So it's not enough to just give people information, right? Because any sort of conservation intervention that we're going to do, any sort of conservation practices we're going to do, are eventually going to come down to the millions upon millions of decisions of everyday men, women, and children, right? So how do we impact that? Well, we know that if you bring people into a facility like ours and you give them up close and personal experiences with animals, they start to form a connection and they start to care. And it's that moment of connection, that moment of caring, that's the start of conservation mindedness. You know, information is great. We should give people information, but they have to care enough to actually go out and do something with that information. And studies have shown that giving people experiences with live animals in zoos and aquariums positively impacts their conservation-related knowledge, attitudes, and behavior. Okay, so big picture, humans are the problem and need to be the solution. And marine mammal facilities play two key roles in addressing those problems. But you also, of course, need to look out for the animals in these facilities. No matter what sort of benefits you might be talking about, whether it's benefits to education or research or conservation, no matter how great those benefits are, you need to carefully weigh them against the well-being of the animals in those facilities and in those studies. So let's talk about that. How are the animals in facilities doing? How do we know? What do the data say? And I want to start by talking a little bit about the center where I am from so that you understand a little bit about where I'm coming from. So I work at a nonprofit marine mammal facility in the Florida Keys called the Dolphin Research Center, or DRC. We have 26 dolphins who live at DRC, ranging in age from almost 4 to about 45. One of those dolphins was collected from the wild many, many decades ago when that was still done. 22 of those dolphins were born at DRC, or actually one of those 22 was born in another facility and transferred to DRC. And 3 of the dolphins were rescued from really bad situations in the wild when they were very young. Specifically, Jax here was the victim of a shark attack that you can see that presumably left his mother dead when he was very young. Louis was the victim, one of the victims of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that we talked about a little bit ago, who, when he washed up, when he stranded on shore, again without a mother, he was given a 5% chance that he would survive at all. He's doing great. And then Summer, who is actually a different species, she's a spotted dolphin, a spinella, she was also found on a beach in very bad condition when she was a little tiny baby with no mother in sight. They all came to DRC. They're all doing great now. So at DRC, we do a number of different research and training sessions with them. One is research. We also do husbandry and medical sessions. We also do some sessions that look at, that are about high energy behaviors, trying to give them a lot of exercise. And we also do interactive programs with our guests. And no matter what kind of session we're doing, we're talking about it, right? So we have narrators who are talking to our guests and telling them what it is they're seeing, answering questions, and or we have trainers or other staff who are out answering questions. All right, so that's DRC. I also want to talk a little bit about marine mammal facilities in general. The first thing I want you all to realize is that in the United States, most cetaceans, so dolphins and whales, who are in marine mammal facilities were born in marine mammal facilities or were rescued from the wild, like the few I talked to you about. There have been no wild collections in U.S. waters for many decades, not since 1989. They live in social groups, they get lots of physical and mental stimulation, and they have great medical care. And of course, all of that sounds great, right? But if all of that's great, then what about some of these criticisms that you sometimes hear where people are concerned about the animals in these facilities? Let's talk about those. What do the data show? Are the dolphins in marine mammal facilities okay? So the first question I want to look at is how long dolphins live. Do they live longer in the wild, or do they live longer in human care, in the marine mammal facility? And the way that we can look at that is we can look at what we call mortality rate. Now, mortality rate is the percentage of a population who dies in a given year. So high mortality rate, that's bad. That means a lot of dolphins are dying. It means they're not living as long. Low mortality rate, that's good. That means not as many dolphins are dying, which means, of course, they're living longer. So let's start with wild populations. Those purple bars are the mortality rates for the 3 wild populations for which we have that information. And what I want you to notice is that they're not all the same, right? The wild is not all one place. There are some populations that are doing really, really well. There are other populations where the mortality rate is much, much, much higher. So for purposes of today, though, I want to focus on the best case scenario. And I want to do that for 3 reasons. First, this particular population, this is a population in Sarasota, Florida, who has been studied for many decades, and they've been well studied, and so we're sure of the data. We also know that the way that they analyze this data is the same way that we analyze the other data that I'm going to show you for marine mammal facilities, and so of course you can compare them because they're analyzed the same way. And third, of course, we want to set the bar high. When we're comparing mortality rate or anything else, we want to compare it against the best situation out there. So let's do that. What I'm about to show you is the mortality rate of animals, specifically bottlenose dolphins, in marine mammal facilities in the United States over the past several decades. Those are those green bars. And what you see is that 40, 50 years ago, the mortality rate was a lot higher than it is for the best case scenario in the wild. And the reason is this was back at a time when a lot of animals, almost all of the animals, were being caught from the wild, which is presumably a really stressful situation. And that was happening at a time before we knew how to take care of these animals, right? We hadn't learned all of those various things I told you about, right? And so we didn't really know how to take care of them. But mortality rate, you can see, has gotten progressively better Until today, the mortality rate in marine mammal facilities in the United States is at least as good as the best case scenario we know about in the wild. These animals are doing great. Okay, the next criticism I want to address is sometimes you'll hear people say, well, you're forcing them to work all day and you should really retire them and you shouldn't force them to work. So I want to step back and unpack that a little bit. What is actually happening in dolphin training sessions and shows? So first, I want to talk about this idea of work. It is true that dolphins at virtually all facilities are asked to do training sessions with trainers throughout the day, at various points in the day, not all day. However, while some people want to characterize that as work with all the negative forced labor kinds of interpretations that entails, we can tell you, we know from an animal caretaking perspective, these kinds of positive reinforcement training sessions, in other words, the kind of training sessions we do with dolphins, actually add to an animal's well-being. They don't detract from it, right? They provide physical stimulation, mental stimulation, and social stimulation, all of which is important, and studies have shown that these kinds of training sessions enhance an animal's well-being, add to their welfare. All right, which sounds great unless you think that somehow we're forcing the animals to take part of these sessions, but we're not. Animals always have a choice whether they're going to participate. Now, the trainers try to make sessions fun so the animals will want to participate, but animals can and do at any time either refuse to do a particular behavior or swim away. And when that happens, nothing bad happens to them. Those animals still get all of their required food regardless of what they choose to participate in or not participate in a given day. So if you ever hear somebody say something like, oh, they either perform or they don't eat, that's just not true. That's just not how it works. Okay, so we're not forcing them. This still leaves the time question, right? Is it the case that we are asking them to do things all day? Well, fortunately, this is an answerable question, right? This is a data question. And at DRC, we're very focused on data, so we thought, all right, well, let's figure this out. How long are we asking them to pay attention to us? So what we did is we did a study where every time a trainer went on a dock to do a session with a dolphin, we timed it. How long are they asking for that dolphin's attention? And we did that for all of our dolphins over multiple days. And what we found is that we were asking an average of an hour and a half of their attention, broken up into several sessions throughout the day. So no, not all day. All right, and finally, last criticism I want to talk about is sometimes you will hear people say something like, dolphins are too smart to do well in zoos and aquariums. They're just so smart that they don't do well in those situations. Now, given my area of research, this is obviously an issue that is near and dear to my heart. So what's up with that? So first, as a scientist, I need to correct this mistaken impression that intelligence is a single thing that animals either have more or less of. You'll notice when we were talking about the dolphin mind, you never heard me use the word intelligence. I never said intelligence. Instead, I said cognition. And the reason is this question of how intelligent is an animal is actually impossible to answer. The reason is, as we showed, animals have evolved in different situations. Their minds have evolved to solve different problems. There is no one single measure of intelligence that makes any sense to measure. So instead, we can still talk about it, but we need to tweak the question. And the way that we tweak the question, instead of how intelligent are they, we ask how are they intelligent? And what that does is it allows us to look at more specific areas like number concepts, physical reasoning, cooperation, imitation, memory. And those we can compare across animals. Okay? And when we do that, we find, like we saw before with dolphins, that there are some areas where they're rock stars. There are some areas where their cognitive processes are pretty sophisticated. But there are other areas where their cognitive processes are not nearly sophisticated as you might think. Now, having said all that, I can also say that when you look at dolphins compared to other animals and you look across a variety of areas, it is true that dolphin cognitive processes are more sophisticated than a lot of other animals. However, that does not mean that they do any worse in zoos or aquariums, as long as we take care of their psychological needs. So of course we need to do that. We need to take care of their psychological needs just as much as we take care of their physical needs. And we do. So let me show you a couple of the ways that we do that. Not that way. Hold on. That way. So first, there's training sessions. Now, we've talked a bit about cognitive research. To us, it's research. To them, it's training. It's thinking games. It's puzzles. It's problems. It's mental stimulation. But there are other sessions that aren't cognitive research are also mental stimulation. The trainers are asking them to learn new things, to experience new things, to cooperate with other dolphins, right? All of that is mental stimulation just as much as it's physical stimulation. We also then, in between sessions, in addition to hanging out with their buddies, which they need to do. Dolphins are social animals. They need to be in social groups and they need to have social time. In addition to that, we also do something that's called environmental enrichment. Now, environmental enrichment is when you add something to their environment, something new for them to play with or experience. So it might be a new toy, it might be a new way of interacting with them, or it might be, down at the bottom there, you see something that we call our Dolphin Entertainment System, or DESI. Now, it's not in the lagoon all the time, but when we do put it in there, it has these two underwater paddles. And depending on the order in which they press those paddles and how they do that, the DESI does different things. So sometimes it might drop out some ice, sometimes it might blow bubbles, sometimes as you see in that picture, it might squirt water. So if they interact with it differently, it interacts with them differently. Okay, and then in our training sessions, there are a number of ways in which we specifically ask them to exercise their minds. We specifically ask them to create, to remember, to problem solve, etc. And I do want to show you some of those. Okay. All right, so in this first behavior, it's called repeat. First, the trainer is going to ask for a behavior, dive, and the dolphin is going to do that. And then after he does that, she's going to give him a pop quiz. So he doesn't know he's going to be asked. She'll repeat it. Now he has to remember, okay, what did I just do? And do that. And he did, and next, combo. This is when you ask them to put more than one behavior together. So this dolphin is being asked to talk, and to flip her flippers, and to dive. And she has to figure out, how do I do all that? Which she does. You can just leaping, flying, talking, dolphin. She was not taught that as a combination. She was taught them separately. And she can figure out, okay, how do I do all those things at the same time? And she's great. And then you can put those two things together. So you're going to see a combo, and actually there's two dolphins. They're being asked to talk, to touch their rostrum, their snouts together, and to dive. So you've got combo, plus you've got cooperation happening with them. And then she's going to ask them to repeat that whole thing. They have to remember, okay, what did we do? And do it together. And you also get an added bonus here. One of them has a young calf in the lagoon named Flagler, and he decided he wanted to go. He wasn't asked to, he just thought it would be fun. So he goes along with that. Innovate. This is a game where we ask them to be creative. The game is, she gives a signal, the dolphin has to do something. Every time she gives that same signal, the dolphin has to do something different. So, same signal, now she's going to flip her flippers. Now she can't do those two things. She has to do yet a third thing, and she's asked again, or something else. All right, match the sample. Let me stop and explain this one. I told you that for our cognitive research is their thinking games. Sometimes we also do research-like games that we're not really doing for research. And match the sample is one of those things where other places have published match the sample with dolphins. We just do it just for the thinking game part. And the way that it works is you're going to see three objects. One of them, the one in the middle, is the sample, and then one of the objects matches it, and what they have to do is touch the one in the middle and then touch the one that matches it. It looks like this.
Whatever articles that we have out there, where you may be able to find it.
And then finally, find same is very similar to that, except it finds something in the lagoon. So she's showing a hoop. She's showing a hoop. Find something that's that same shape. So he finds a dive ring. And by the way, that little dive where he came up, that wasn't actually part of the behavior. He just likes this particular game, and so it's excited. Okay, so that is just a number of the ways that we take care of their psychological needs. All right, so to end, I want to leave you with 4 ideas. If you remember nothing else about anything I've said, I want you to remember these 4 things. 1, humans are the biggest threat to wild dolphins, and we need to do everything in our power to get humans to understand that and to start taking steps to mitigate that. Second, marine mammal facilities play 2 key roles in addressing conservation issues. We provide opportunities for research that you can't get in the wild, and we provide a public education and a way of connecting the public to the issues which lead to conservation. And actually, marine mammal facilities play a 3rd role as well, which is that they're directly involved in the rescue and providing a forever home to animals that are victims of our environmental messes like living here. 3rd, dolphins thrive in accredited marine mammal facilities. And by the word accredited, I'm meaning to highlight those facilities that have a high standard of animal welfare and animal care. I am not claiming that dolphins would do well in any situation. Of course they wouldn't. People don't, dogs don't, horses don't. They have to be in a situation where we're taking care of their physical needs, their social needs, their psychological needs, like in an accredited marine mammal facility. But when you do that, dolphins do great. Dolphins are actually one of the most successful animals in a zoological setting. And finally, even though I've talked mainly about dolphins in facilities, I want to leave you with a thought that we try to impart to all of our guests, which is human choices impact every animal on this planet. There is not an animal that is out of our reach. We're the ones who decide whether to harass them, whether to pollute their environment, whether to take their environment, right? There is not an animal that's out of our reach. We're already responsible for that. And it's time that we started taking that responsibility seriously. All right. While I take questions, let me just leave up these few resources for you. If you want to find out more about conservation, you can go to our website where we've got information about conservation of wild dolphins and what you can do. If you want to find out more about our research, you can either go to our website and read about it, or even better yet, come see us. We do all of our research in front of the public. We love talking about it, so come talk to us about research, dolphins, conservation, etc. Hey, do a class field trip. And if that's not in your school budget, you can still do distance learning. So we have a situation that you can look up on our website where we can have your class dial in and have a distance learning session. And of course, we understand that not everybody and have a distance learning session. And of course, we understand that not everybody is going to be able to make it to Florida. We're not the only accredited marine mammal facility that's out there. There are a lot of good facilities that are out there. To find one near you, I would suggest going to the website of the Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Aquariums, listed here. For dolphins in particular, this is probably the most important accrediting body in the world. Okay, now with that said, I'm going to take just a drink and then I'll look back at all of your various questions and we'll see what we can do. All right, let me go way to the back. Tech check, yes, we did all that. We can hear each other. All right, I've got a question. Where do you get the dolphins from? I think I answered that one, but just to recap, one of the dolphins was collected from the wild way back when in the 80s when that was still going on. Most of the dolphins, almost all of our dolphins were born at DRC, and we have a few that were rescued from the wild. I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand this. Can the dolphins born in captivity survive in the wild? Probably not. Just in the same way that if someone were to put you out in the wild, you probably wouldn't be able to survive as well. Dolphins are animals that learn, and they don't know how to survive in the wild. And there have been a few cases where that has been tried, and it has not ended well. Dolphins do not do well in that situation. Let's see. Is there a certain age the dolphins have to be to start learning tricks? No, it depends. So generally, it depends on the calf. So when calves are really young, they're just hanging out with mom, and that's fine. And then depending on their dolphinality, sometimes they'll want to start interacting with people. And usually what happens is the babies will start, like you saw with actually Flagler, the babies will start going along on behaviors with mom. So it's not that the trainer is asking them to do particular behaviors. They just often are very imitative animals. And so they'll imitate mom and they'll go along with mom, and then sort of ease into it that way. But I don't think we have a particular age at which they start. It's very dependent on when they want to. It's all about choice. Um, what do humans do that threatens the dolphins? Pretty sure I answered that. So we talked about, pollution. That's a really, really big one. And people think that it's not just if you are dropping trash into the ocean itself. Um, any sort of pollution that you do to the environment, all the plastics are a really, really big problem, that people are beginning to notice, because plastics don't break down. And so all the plastics that we're creating, that we're discarding all the time, um, they go somewhere. And where they go is the ocean, and animals get really hurt by that. Um, okay, let's see what else we can read. Sorry. How do the dolphins understand what you want them to do just using hand signals? Um, that's a great question. And I'm not sure if you're asking, what's going on in their head. I can tell you that the way that you do it is, so for example, in that situation that I told you about where the baby goes along with mom, right? So the baby is already doing that behavior. And so what you can do then is show them the signal as they're doing the behavior, and then get very excited for them. And then you pair that over and over. So next time they do it, you show them the signal, you get very excited for them. Show them the signal, get very excited for them. And you can do that even before they're eating solid food, or once they're eating solid food, or once they're interacting with you. You can also either give them fish and or give them rubs and high fives, and all of these kinds of things that the dolphins find really reinforcing. And when you pair them over and over, they'll start to learn that. So that's one. Another way, you can do something that's called shaping a particular behavior. And this is the basis of animal training, not just with dolphins, but with all kinds of animals. And what you do, so for example, let's say you're trying to teach a dolphin to do a flip, right? What you might do is first you have something that's called a target pole, and you teach them to touch the end of this target pole. Okay, great. Now you can move that target pole around, and then they'll touch that, and they'll go with it. Then you can start what's called approximating the behavior. So the idea is that you try to reinforce what they're doing, then go a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, right? And so now, say with the flip, now you might move the target pole in a circle, they go in a circle, right? And once they've got that down, now you can start moving it in the air and moving it in the air. And so you do what's called successive approximations in order to shape that behavior. Um, are dolphins more interested in having their physical or social needs met? Well, I could ask the same thing about people, right? So with people, if I asked you that, are people more interested in having their physical or social needs met? Um, you you would say, well, it depends on the person. As long as you're talking about, beyond the very, very, very basics. Obviously, dolphins and people have to have enough food to eat, right? Assuming that they're not starving, then are they more interested in food, or are they more interested in hanging out with their buddies? And with people, right, some would choose that differently. And it's the same thing with the dolphins. There are some dolphins who are really food motivated, and there are some dolphins who really don't care about food hardly at all. And you have to almost trick them into eating. Do baby dolphins have teeth when they are born? Honestly, I don't. Maybe one of my DRC friends can help. I want to say that they do. In fact, I want to say they have very, very, very sharp teeth when they're young. But maybe someone else can help me out with that. Okay, we've still got a few minutes left. Do dolphins understand what you? I'm not sure what that means. Sorry. Can different dolphins understand what you communicate? I'm going to guess that means communicate, or are there challenges like communication? Um, so this is a really great question, right? So if I'm understanding you correctly, it's how is it that you can communicate with the dolphins? And that's one of the problems that we run into, not one of the problems, one of the challenges we run into in any sort of research is how do you get the dolphins to know what the game is, right? So for example, let's take the communication or the cooperation game that I showed you. If I were to try to get you guys to cooperate, I could just tell you, I could say, hey, look, what I want you guys to do is press the button at the same time. Can't do that with the dolphins. We don't have a shared language. So instead, we have to figure out cues and ways of giving them a little bit of information at a time so that they can do that. So for example, with cooperation, the way that we did it is first, we trained them to press the buttons individually. So when you're given that signal, press a button. Once they could do that, now we would send them together and we'd say, okay, now press the button. And we wouldn't tell them press them at the same time because they don't know, but we just send them at the same time. And we had, instead of a 1 second window, we had a 2 second window. So we made it a little bit easier for them to win, then we made it harder, then we made it a little bit harder. Then we started sending them, say, 1 second apart. And so sometimes they would win, sometimes they would lose. And that gives them information about how do you win that game. And so from that, hopefully then they figure out the game. And in this case, they did, and they ended up being rock stars with that. My students are wondering if you have worked with other mammals besides dolphins. I have. So in my background, I have worked with human children, and I have worked with chimpanzees in terms of their tool use and their social learning. In fact, I first worked with kids and with chimps, and I came to dolphins after I got my Ph.D. But I think I'm here for the duration now because they're very cool. I have now. Bottlenose dolphins are born with 25 teeth, Lynn M is telling me. Um, so let's see. Could you share us the presentation by email? It's actually really big, this presentation, so I'm not sure that's going to work. However, my understanding, and someone from the biodiversity thing, tell me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that this has been recorded or is being recorded. And once it is recorded, it will be posted on YouTube. And so once that happens, you'll be able to access it that way. Okay. Do dolphins only eat fish? No. Dolphins primarily eat fish, but they also might eat some other things like squid, for example. Um, and, and just like with people, some of them have different kinds of tastes. Some of them like things better than others. So for example, when we try to feed squid, some of the dolphins think it's great. Some of them, don't want anything to do with it. Can the YouTube link be sent to today's participants? I imagine so. I don't know the answer to that, but you can always email me and we'll figure it out. Oh, how do they sleep? Dolphins sleep. It's a great question. Sleep is a problem for dolphins because dolphins have to take each breath consciously. So for us, we can be unconscious and we can breathe. If a dolphin did that and they were underwater, they would drown. So they have to take each breath consciously. So they can't go to sleep per se. So the way evolution has solved that problem is they sleep 1/2 of their brain at a time. So 1/2 of their brain goes to sleep and they kind of rest at the surface. And that way the other half of their brain can be in charge of remembering, hey, go breathe. And then at other times, the other half of their brain um, will be asleep. And I'm seeing from Alec, yes, the YouTube link will be sent out. So there you go. Kevin, do dolphin and shark altercations happen often? I don't know how to, quantify often. They happen often enough. I showed you that Jax, for example, our little one, well, he's not so little anymore. He was. He's not the only one. But when he came to us, he was, and he was the victim of a shark attack. But of course, most of the time, we're not watching what happens in the wild. So it's hard to know how often does that happen because most of the time it's not within our sight. Okay, so it is 1 o'clock. So we're done. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me and come see us.